On a warm June evening in 2012, the Porter twins Emma and Lily, age 7, vanished from their own backyard birthday party in the quiet town of Alder Creek, Michigan. The cake was untouched, the presents unopened. One moment they were laughing in the glow of string lights, then they were gone. 13 years passed, no leads, no trace. But everything changed when an elderly neighbor died unexpectedly, and the police broke the lock on his long-forgotten shed. What they found inside would unravel a hidden horror no one in Alder Creek could have imagined. The sun lingered longer than usual that June evening, casting a golden hue across the Porter family's backyard as laughter floated through the air. Colorful streamers rippled in the breeze, twisting above tables laden with juice boxes, confetti cupcakes, and gifts wrapped in glittery paper. Emma and Lily, identical in every way except the birthmark behind Lily's left ear, darted between the guests in matching yellow sundresses, their braids trailing behind them like twin comets. They were 7 today, 7 and endlessly alive. Their mother, Dana, snapped photos by the dozen, capturing the girls blowing out candles in unison, their cheeks puffed with anticipation. Their father, Greg, manned the grill with tongs in one hand and a soda in the other, trading jokes with the neighbors while flipping burgers. There were easily 30 people present: family, co-workers, neighbors, classmates, even a few plus ones no one quite remembered inviting. The party had spilled into dusk, the porch lights flickering on as fireflies began to blink in the tall grass. The chatter was loud, the music light, the world safe. Until it wasn't. The first to notice something off was Dana. She'd called for the girls to open their presents, but they didn't come bounding over as they always did. "Emma? Lily?" she called again. Louder this time, her voice forced bright, as if volume could override the prickling sense of wrongness clawing up her spine. No answer. She checked the bounce house empty. The bathroom no sign. Then she asked Greg, had he seen them? "They were just here a minute ago," he said, scanning the yard as he set down his drink. It was the kind of thing you said without thinking, the kind of line everyone says in stories like this. The backyard search grew frantic in seconds. Neighbors peeled off into pairs, calling out the girls' names into the woods behind the house. Someone mentioned they might have wandered to the cul-de-sac where the Petersons were setting off sparklers. But no one had seen the twins. Not since the last photo Dana had taken, time-stamped 6:40, 2 p.m. By 7:15, panic had bloomed in full. The police were called. The party ended without a goodbye. A few guests stayed behind, trying to be helpful, but their presence felt like clutter in a tragedy that was sharpening by the second. An officer found 2 tiny shoes by the edge of the woods, not placed neatly but abandoned in motion. One heel caught on a root, the other sideways in the grass. That night, as floodlights lit the forest and dogs barked into the dark, Alder Creek's innocence dissolved. The Porter twins were gone, and the world, somehow, had kept turning. The sirens came first soft at a distance, then louder, urgent, undeniable. By the time the last streaks of twilight faded from the sky, red and blue lights danced across the Porter family's lawn. Uniformed officers moved with quiet intensity, setting up perimeter tape that flapped in the wind like warning flags. Greg stood on the porch, his face bloodless, answering the same questions again and again. What were they wearing? When was the last time he saw them? Was there anyone suspicious? Dana sat on the swing, arms wrapped tight around her middle, rocking gently, eyes hollow. Her voice had gone somewhere unreachable. The neighbors didn't go home. Instead, they grabbed flashlights and flashbacks, trying to replay every moment of the party, scouring for a detail that might matter now. The backyard, once filled with music and laughter, was carved into sections: playground, woods, garden, pond. Each one combed carefully, methodically. The bounce house sagged in the corner, a deflated witness. The woods were the first focus. Thick, brambly, tangled with decades of secrecy, they stretched beyond the backyard like an invitation to vanish. The K-9 units wove through the underbrush, their handlers calling out commands as beams of light danced through the branches. Someone found a juice box near a tree stump, half drained, straw still in place, but no footprints, no sign of struggle, just silence and shadows. Then came the pond. It wasn't deep, just a wide, shallow basin fed by a trickling stream that turned stagnant in the heat of summer. Murky and still, the surface reflected stars and fear. Firemen arrived with poles and drag hooks. A diver suited up, oxygen tank hissing like a countdown. Dana screamed when she saw him go under, as if the act alone confirmed her worst terror. Greg had to hold her back, his own face twisted in helplessness. One shoe, one sock. That was all they recovered from the water's edge, and even those might have belonged to a guest child, tossed aside during the chaos. No other trace, no bubbles. No fabric caught in roots or reeds, just stillness. As dawn broke, casting the sky in weary pink, volunteers stumbled back from the woods and the pond, eyes raw from crying or lack of sleep. A new shift of officers took over. Reporters began to gather at the end of the street. The sun rose over Alder Creek, but for the Porter family, there was no morning. Only the unbearable continuation of night. The morning after the search, the Porter house looked like a crime scene from a photograph, too still, too clean, as if real life had been vacuumed out overnight. The scent of barbecue still clung faintly to the patio furniture. Balloons hung deflated over the fence line, sagging like grief. Inside, Dana sat at the kitchen table staring at a single hair elastic in her palm purple with tiny stars, the kind Lily always wore until it snapped. Across from her, Greg gave his statement to the detective for the third time, his hands trembling around his coffee mug. By noon, the whispers had begun. "It was Derek," they said, Derek Price. Greg's oldest friend from college. The one with the beer in hand all night, the too loud laugh, the shirt stained with ketchup and pride. He was always at their family parties, sometimes invited, sometimes not. Dana had never liked him, called him a man-child, a drunk who never grew up. He was the last person anyone saw talking to the girls. One of the guests remembered seeing him near the woods around 6. Another swore he saw Derek walking back alone 15 minutes later, wiping something from his hands. Someone else mentioned he had a habit of sneaking drinks out of the cooler when no one was looking. Then a neighbor claimed Derek had been watching the girls too closely during the cake cutting, his eyes lingering too long, his smile too wide. That was all it took. By sunset, Derek had become the shape of fear everyone could point to. Police arrived at his small rental home on the edge of town with quiet urgency. He didn't resist. In fact, he looked relieved when they knocked, like he'd been expecting them. His blood alcohol content was still elevated, 9, and he reeked of whiskey and sweat. They found a lighter in his coat pocket and a folded photo of the twins in his glove compartment, one Dana had handed out to guests years ago. The arrest was quick, the headlines immediate. Family friend taken into custody in Porter twins case. But the evidence evaporated as fast as it came. His car showed no signs of travel through the woods. His clothes were clean. The photo, while unsettling, wasn't proof of anything. He passed the polygraph. Security footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera showed Derek on the porch at 6:50, talking to someone else. The timeline didn't fit. After 48 hours, they let him go. Derek left through the back entrance of the station in silence, his name already ruined, his face familiar to everyone for the wrong reason. Back in Alder Creek, the suspicion didn't leave with him. It just settled over everyone else instead, heavier than before. Alder Creek had always been the kind of place where people borrowed sugar without asking, where garage doors stayed open on summer evenings and children darted barefoot between houses like bees between flowers. Neighbors waved from porches, kept casseroles warm just in case, and knew the names of every golden retriever and third-grade teacher in town. But after the twins vanished, that easy warmth hardened into something brittle and sharp-edged. Doors closed earlier. Curtains stayed drawn. Trust, once abundant, turned scarce. In the weeks following the disappearance, whispers stitched themselves into everyday conversations like splinters. At the farmer's market, someone said they saw Alan Myers, the retired gym teacher, washing his truck at midnight, the night the girls went missing. At the gas station, a clerk said Rachel Cook from 2 streets over had too many cameras installed for someone who had nothing to hide. In the school parking lot, a mother refused to let her daughter carpool with anyone but blood relatives. The fractures were small at first: a canceled playdate, an awkward silence at a PTA meeting, a friendly wave ignored. But like hairline cracks in glass, they spread fast. Dana noticed it when no one brought food anymore. In the first few days, her porch had overflowed with Tupperware and sympathy, hands wringing dish towels, voices murmuring, "If you need anything." But then suspicion came, and with it, silence. The dishes stopped. The hands stopped. The phone didn't ring. One afternoon, Greg saw a group of men from the neighborhood gathered near the community bulletin board, speaking in hushed tones. When he approached, they stopped talking. He pretended not to notice, but the weight of it hung with him the rest of the day. By late summer, the annual block party was canceled. The town council said it was out of respect for the family, but everyone knew the real reason. Nobody wanted to gather in one place anymore. Nobody wanted to look into another parent's eyes and wonder, "Did you see something you didn't report? Did your kid say something you didn't pass along? Could it have been you?" Even the children changed. Once fearless and free, they now played in fenced yards under watchful eyes. They didn't sleep over. They didn't walk to school. They asked questions their parents couldn't answer about monsters who wore friendly faces and whether birthdays were safe. Alder Creek hadn't lost just 2 girls. It had lost its mirror, and what stared back now was a stranger. The house grew quiet in ways that sound couldn't fill. There were still noises: footsteps, the creak of the hallway vent, the soft buzz of the refrigerator, but none of them mattered. What was missing rang louder than anything else: the girls' laughter, the thud of tiny feet running down the stairs, the squeal that came every morning when the school bus turned the corner. Greg and Dana Porter lived in that silence now, each trapped in their own orbit, colliding only in arguments and exhaustion. At first, they clung to each other. That first month, Dana couldn't sleep without Greg's hand in hers. He brought her coffee in the morning she couldn't get out of bed, and she sat beside him in silence while he gave police interviews for the 5th, 6th, 7th time. But grief is a slow fire. And eventually, when the smoke didn't clear, they started choking on each other. Dana couldn't understand why Greg wasn't more angry, why he didn't scream, demand answers, punch a wall. Greg couldn't understand why Dana couldn't stay still for even a second, why she tore through boxes in the garage looking for old photos, why she kept calling the station for updates they didn't have. Their grief moved at different speeds, collided in unpredictable places. Dana built shrines first in the girls' room, then in the dining room, then online. She started a Facebook page, Find Emma and Lily, and posted daily updates, photos, memories. She turned their birthdays into vigils, their favorite songs into rallying cries. Strangers reached out: psychics, bloggers, grief tourists. Some gave hope, most gave nothing. She answered all of them. Greg spent hours in the basement organizing files. He built a timeline, bought a whiteboard, printed out satellite maps of the woods. He marked out routes the girls might have taken, plotted the coordinates of every reported sighting. He started working night staking shifts at the hospital even when he didn't have to, just so he wouldn't have to sit in the living room where Emma once fell asleep curled under his arm. They went to therapy, separately, together, then separately again. Each session left them raw, more broken than before. The therapist told them grief was not linear, that they had to make space for each other's pain. Dana stopped going after 5 weeks. Greg lasted 7. On the anniversary of the girls' disappearance, they held a press conference. Dana spoke first, her voice hoarse, trembling with unshed fury. Greg stood behind her, silent, his hands clenched so tightly they left marks. Afterward, they drove home in silence, each staring out their own window, each wondering how much more loss their marriage could take before it vanished too. Walter Grimley had lived across the street from the Porters for longer than anyone could remember. Long enough to have seen their house painted 3 different colors, to have watched the maple trees go from saplings to shade givers, to have handed out Halloween candy to Greg when he was a boy. He had the kind of presence that faded into the background, neither warm nor unfriendly, just there. A part of the neighborhood's landscape, like the cracked sidewalk by the hydrant or the crow that nested in the church bell tower every spring. In the year after the twins vanished, Walter's house remained unchanged, a modest, moss-covered colonial with sun-bleached curtains and a porch that sagged at the edges. He didn't speak much, never weighed in during the town meetings, never joined the search parties. He told the police everything he knew, which wasn't much, and then went back to his quiet routines. Tending the vegetable garden, painting birdhouses in his garage, walking his little terrier, Molly, twice a day like clockwork. People whispered, of course. In Alder Creek, silence had become suspicious. He lived alone, never had visitors, never seemed shaken by what had happened across the street. Dana said once, in a moment of desperation, "He never even looked at me after they disappeared." Like nothing had happened at all. Greg told her not to read into it, but even he watched Walter a little closer after that. And then there was the shed. It sat at the back corner of Walter's yard, tucked behind the hedge and shaded by an old elm tree. Faded green, its wooden panels warped with age, the roof half covered in vines. It looked like something out of a forgotten storybook, harmless, even charming. But the lock on the door was new, thick, industrial, shiny against the rusted hasp. No one had ever seen it open. Teenagers dared each other to knock on it, to try the handle, but no one ever had the courage to push further. Walter always seemed to know when someone was near it. He'd appear from around the house, Molly trotting behind him, voice calm but firm. "That shed's not a toy." And that was it. No one asked what was inside. It was easier to write it off as old man paranoia, a relic of some forgotten trauma, maybe a war, maybe a life lost in pieces. The shed was just part of Walter Grimley. Odd, untouched, locked tight against the world. And in a town already haunted by one disappearance, no one thought to wonder what might be hiding in plain sight. Detective Ray Halbridge had boxes in his attic that no one touched. Cardboard tombs of unsolved cases, their contents yellowed and brittle with time. After retiring from the Alder Creek Police Department 6 years ago, he'd promised his wife he'd leave it all behind. He made it as far as his first fishing trip before the quiet started eating at him. Some men missed the badge. Ray missed the unfinished questions. It was a cold afternoon in late November when he climbed into the attic again, ostensibly to look for Christmas lights. But his hand found the box before his eyes did, labeled in his own handwriting, Porter Twins, June 2012. He carried it downstairs, his breath catching in his throat like it always did when he saw the photo of Emma and Lily clipped to the first page of the incident report. Two grinning girls in matching sun hats, gap-toothed and blindingly alive. He spread everything out on the dining table: witness statements, map overlays, timeline logs, the forensics reports. Nothing new, just ghosts. Until he found the photo again. Not of the girls, of the grass. A single crime scene photo taken at the edge of the Porter's property near the south fence line, the one with the footprints. At the time, it had seemed like background noise. Everyone was focused on the woods, the pond, the crowd. Dozens of guests had moved through the backyard that night. Shoes, boots, sandal, all kinds. But these had been different. Small, barefoot, 2 sets, parallel. And they hadn't led into the woods, but away from them toward the street. Ray remembered pointing it out, vaguely, in a meeting. Someone had shrugged and said, "Probably from earlier in the day, kids running around." That was the last time it came up. But now, looking at it again with the benefit of distance, it landed wrong. The prints were fresh, sinking into damp earth from a sprinkler run. The direction was deliberate. They didn't wander. They went somewhere. And worst of all, they vanished halfway across the lawn. No drag marks, no deeper indents, no sudden turn. Just gone. Ray sat back in his chair and stared out the window, across the street to the row of aging houses. He thought about the muddy prints, about where they ended, about what had stood just beyond them 13 years ago. Walter Grimley's hedge. And behind, Thathis' locked shed. The anniversaries used to come with cameras. The first year, the front lawn was a maze of tripods and microphone cords. Reporters jostled for position while Dana stood beneath the porch light, holding a photo of the girls, her voice quivering through a prepared statement. She wore the same lavender blouse she'd worn on the day of the party, said it helped her remember. Greg stood beside her, staring past the crowd, jaw clenched like he could hold his family together by sheer force. By the second year, there were fewer vans. One local crew, a podcaster from Chicago who asked if the parents believed in dark web trafficking rings. Dana didn't finish the interview. Greg didn't speak at all. By year 5, there were no cameras, just a few friends, a few candles. A man from the church showed up, uninvited to sing a hymn no one asked for. Dana let him. Greg didn't come downstairs. After that, silence. The girls' room stayed the same for the first decade. The calendar on the wall remained fixed on June 2012, with hearts drawn on the 9th. Stuffed animals perched untouched on the bed, their plastic eyes slowly collecting dust. Every once in a while Dana would go in and fold something. Move a brush, wipe the mirror. She said it helped. Greg started keeping the door shut. Every birthday, Dana still baked the same cake. Chocolate with strawberry icing, the kind Emma always picked, even though Lily liked vanilla better. At first, she donated the cake to the firehouse or left slices with neighbors. Eventually, they ended up in the trash, untouched except for the initials she'd write in pink frosting. E and L. Greg hated the cake. He never said it, but Dana saw the way he'd leave the house when the scent of baking filled the air. He'd drive aimlessly for hours. Sometimes he wouldn't come back until after midnight. The first time it happened, she called the police. The 5th time, she stopped waiting up. There was no news, no new leads. The case file gathered dust at the department, quietly marked inactive. Dana still called every few months, always reaching someone newer, younger. They said the right things were still looking, ma'am, but she could hear it in their voices. The box was closed. But for Dana and Greg, the silence didn't mean it was over. It just meant they were the only ones still listening. It happened quietly, the way so many endings do. On a cold morning in early March, Walter Grimley didn't collect his newspaper. By noon, the mail had begun to stack in his box. And by sunset, Molly's Barkinga High, anxious yell pierced the stillness of Alder Creek's usually uneventful street. It was the paper boy who finally told the police. "Old man Grimley hasn't come to the door in 2 days," he said. "And that dog's going crazy." The responding officer found Walter in his recliner, wrapped in a heavy knit blanket, eyes closed like he'd simply dozed off and forgotten to wake. The television played static. A half-eaten apple sat on the side table. Molly wouldn't stop whining as the officer called it in. There was no sign of struggle, no note, no mess, just absence. He was 82. The obituary was small, tucked between a church raffle ad and a help-wanted listing in the local paper. Walter Lee Grimley, 82, of Alder Creek, passed away peacefully in his home. No mention of children, no surviving spouse. Only a single line at the end. He is survived by a nephew, Thomas Grimley, of Dayton, Ohio. Thomas arrived 4 days later in a rental car with out-of-state plates and a face that said he didn't want to be here. He was tall, late 40s, with an air of someone used to waiting in airports. He signed the keys over from the town clerk with barely a word, muttered something about getting this over with, and spent his first night in a motel off Highway 9. Neighbors watched from their windows as he returned the next morning with a bundle of trash bags and a thermos of coffee. He moved with purpose, the way people do when they want to leave a place before it remembers them. Inside, the house was preserved in the way only loneliness can preserve nothing touched, nothing changed. Wallpaper faded to the memory of color. Books stacked in leaning towers. A coat still hanging by the door. Thomas didn't know much about his uncle. His mother had stopped talking to Walter in the 80s, something about an argument that never made its way down the family tree. Thomas had met him once, maybe twice, when he was a boy. A vague memory of a man with a deep voice and a stiff handshake. But he had the key, he had the deed. And, in the far corner of the backyard, Beneath an elm tree still bare from winter, he had a shed with a rusted green roof and a padlock that didn't match the age of the wood around it. He almost didn't notice it at all. It started with the ivy. Thick cords of it had wrapped themselves around the shed like fingers clenched in sleep, climbing up the rotting wood, curling beneath the gutters. Thomas cursed under his breath as he hacked at it with garden shears, the blade slipping on damp bark. It was late afternoon, the sun already beginning its slow descent behind the houses, and he'd spent most of the day clearing out the attic-old books, dusty newspapers, boxes of brass screws labeled in trembling handwriting. The shed had been an afterthought, just one more thing to deal with before calling the realtor. Up close, it looked worse than it had from the window. Sagging roof, splintered panels, a small square window fogged from the inside. But it was the lock that drew his attention, a black, heavy-duty padlock, newer than anything else on the property. The hasp had been reinforced with a metal plate screwed directly into the frame. Someone had wanted this door to stay shut. He jiggled it, half expecting it to fall apart. It didn't. The thing was solid, bolted tight, the key long gone if there had ever been one left behind at all. He fetched a crowbar from the garage and wedged it between the hasp and the wood, bracing his foot against the frame. The wood gave before the metal did. With a groan and a sharp crack, the lock tore loose, dragging half the doorframe with it. Thomas stepped back, brushing sawdust from his jeans, heart pounding faster than he'd admit. The air that spilled out from the gap was stale and sweet like rotting apples, and something else beneath it. Something older. He hesitated only a second before pulling the door wide. It was darker inside than it should have been, the single window smeared with grime. He reached for the cord hanging from the ceiling and tugged. The bulb flickered once, twice, then held. The room was small, maybe 10 feet by 10, but every inch of it had been used. A desk along the back wall, stained and scuffed. Metal shelving stacked with books, some with worn spines, others handwritten. A small cot tucked into the corner, its sheets rumpled. A calendar on the wall, frozen in a year that did not match the one outside. And then he saw the drawings. Taped in uneven rows on the far wall, dozens of crayon picturesque figures, trees, 2 girls holding hands under a sun with too many rays. One was signed, just once, in purple marker, Emma, age 11. Thomas stepped back. The shed felt smaller now, too small, like it had been watching him this whole time. Thomas's hands were shaking by the time he reached his phone. He stood just outside the shed, his breath clouding in the cool evening air, one foot still dusted with soil from where the ivy had been pulled up. He hadn't touched anything, not since the drawings, not since he opened the drawer of the desk and saw the small cloth-bound diary with LP scrawled on the corner in faded ink. He hadn't opened it. Couldn't. The 911 operator answered on the second ring. Thomas didn't know how to explain. "I'm cleaning out my uncle's property," he began. "I found something in his shed. I think it might be related to a case, a missing persons case, from years ago." He gave the address, stumbled through the rest. They asked if he was safe. He wasn't sure how to answer. The first squad car arrived in under 10 minutes, then another, then an unmarked vehicle. By the time the sky turned the deep gray of nightfall, the block was sealed with yellow tape, and a forensic team was suiting up in the driveway. Neighbors peered from behind curtains and cracked doors. Their breath hitching on whispers passed between them like secrets. Detective Evelyn Shaw stepped into the shed first. She was seasoned 20 years in child crimes, 10 of those on cold cases. She thought she'd seen it all, until now. The smell was the first thing. Not rot, exactly, more like the absence of life. Stagnant air, sealed memories. She moved carefully through the space, eyes scanning every inch with clinical precision. The drawings made her stop. Each one was dated. Some were overlapping and style different hands, different pressure. 2 children, then just one. At some point, the sun disappeared from the skies they drew. So did the smiles. They catalogued everything. The cot, the child-sized slippers beneath it, The empty food cans stacked behind the desk, the calendar frozen in 2018, the last marked date circled in red. February 12th. Inside the desk drawer, they found more drawings, these torn, frantic. One showed a girl behind bars. Another was just a name written over and over until the paper tore. Lily, Lily, Lily. Then they lifted the loose panel beneath the cot and found the locket, gold-plated, engraved with two initials, E+L. The officers didn't speak for a while after that. Shaw stepped outside, blinking against the porch light as if surfacing from underwater. "I want the full case file on the Porter twins," she said. "Now." It was nearly midnight when Officer Ramirez knelt beside the cot, her flashlight beam crawling across the cracked linoleum. The room had already yielded too many drawings, too many traces of life that should have never been lived in such a place. But it was the uneven groan of the floor when she shifted her weight that caught her attention. A soft creak, different from the others. Hollow. She pressed down again. This time, it was unmistakable. "Here," she called out. "Something's under this." Detective Shaw joined her seconds later. Together, they pried at the warped board near the head of the bed. It came up with a splintering pop, revealing not insulation or forgotten wiring, but a dark rectangular void opening just wide enough for a small body to slip through. A makeshift tunnel, its mouth framed in plywood, the edge worn smooth from use. The air that rose from it was colder than the room above, and far more still. Ramirez aimed her light down. Wooden rungs had been hammered into the sides of the tunnel, descending into dirt. No smell, no sound, just shadow. A crawl space, maybe, or something worse. One of the techs brought a scope cam. Shaw watched from the monitor as the lens descended slowly, capturing dirt walls and a narrow path barely 3 feet high, supported by beams that looked far too fragile. 20 feet in, the tunnel opened into a small chamber carved from the earth itself. A second cot, a metal bucket, shelves made from milk crates. And in the far corner, a red spiral notebook with cartoon kittens on the cover, its surface smeared with dust and what looked like the faint outline of a handprint. They sent in the smallest team member, a junior forensic tech named Hartman, barely out of academy, and, when he returned, pale and silent, he held the notebook like something radioactive. They opened it in silence. The first page was filled with blocky, careful handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means I'm probably gone. My name is Emma Porter. I don't know what day it is." The next pages told a story no one was ready for, about a man called Him, about how Lily stopped talking and then stopped waking up, about rules, about silence, about punishment. Every line written in the voice of a child forced to grow up underground. Detective Shaw closed the notebook and didn't speak for a full minute. Then she looked at Ramirez, her voice low. She was alive down there, for years. The staircase was narrow, steep, and unlit, more ladder than steps. It dropped down from the base of the tunnel like a throat swallowing light. The air grew colder with each rung, dense with the smell of aged wood, and something harder to name, time, maybe, or memory. The forensic team moved slowly, flashlights cutting through the dark, as they descended into a space that hadn't been touched by daylight in what felt like decades. The basement ceiling was low enough that Shaw had to duck. Her boots touched linoleum tile, yellowed with age and curling at the corners. The room unfolded around her like a secret someone had been too careful to forget. Wood paneling lined the walls, stained dark with watermarks near the base. A rotary phone sat on a dusty end table, unplugged but polished. Across from it, a tweed couch sagged in the middle, draped with a knitted afghan. On the far side of the room was a kitchenette Esmol sink, a hot plate, canned goods arranged neatly on open shelves. Cream of mushroom, canned peas, SpaghettiOs, labels faded to soft pastels. It looked like someone had pressed pause in 1979 and walked away. But someone hadn't walked away. Someone had stayed. A bookshelf stood against the back wall, its titles lined in rows too carefully arranged to be decorative. There were textbooks 5th and 6th grade reading levels, alongside young adult novels, encyclopedias, and handmade journals. On one of the end tables, a deck of cards sat mid-game, two queens face up like they'd been waiting for a player to return. Then there was the mirror. Nailed to the wall beside the bookshelf, it was cracked at the corner but clean, wiped with care. Below it, a box of hair ties, brushes, a pair of plastic barrettes, shaped like butterfly's own pink, one missing a wing. "She grew up here," Ramirez murmured. Everywhere they looked, they found the signs. Measurements on the doorframe, tallied in pencil. Emma marked again and again, each year growing higher. No Lily, past the year 2015. Shaw turned slowly, her light resting on a closet door. Inside, they found clothes folded, washed, sized for a child, then a tween, then a teenager, some handmade. Some sewn from old fabric, stitched with clumsy hands. It was a bedroom, a classroom, a prison. And, for someone, M8 had been home. The drawing was easy to miss at first. Tucked behind the door that led to the cramped sleeping area, it had faded into the paneling, its once bright colors dulled by years of damp air and dust. Ramirez was the one who spotted either flashlight sweeping low, catching a flash of red wax bleeding across brown wood. She knelt slowly, brushing away cobwebs and a fine layer of dust that clung like powder. What she uncovered pulled the breath from her lungs. It was a crayon drawing, done directly on the wall, not on paper, not tucked away, etched. Two girls holding hands beneath a crooked sun. One had red hair, scrawled in wild, messy lines. The other was shorter, with yellow streaks for braids. Around them were tree stall, green, leaning as though blown by wind. Above them floated a blue shape, uneven and oblong. A balloon maybe, or a moon. But it was what stood behind the girls that froze Ramirez. A house. Simple lines. A roof. A chimney. And behind it, a shed. The shed was drawn darker than everything else, heavy black crayon strokes, layers upon layers as though the child had pressed hard, again and again. A door, barely visible through the scribbled void, was drawn slightly open, and inside, two red dots for eyes. Beneath the image, in uneven handwriting, was the signature, Emma, age 11. Detective Shaw crouched beside Ramirez, both of them staring in silence. "She was here," Ramirez whispered. "At 11. That's 4 years after they closed the case." Shaw didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the drawing. The black strokes, the thing behind the door, the sun and the trees, and the two girls holding hands like they were pretending it was still okay. Like it hadn't already changed. A technician began photographing the wall, framing it like art in a gallery. And in some dark, aching way, that's what it was, art created by someone trying to make sense of the senseless. "I thought Lily was gone by then," Ramirez said softly. "Maybe she was," Shaw replied, "or maybe Emma kept drawing her to pretend she wasn't." They stood there a long time, the room cold around them, the drawing vivid in its stillness, a final message from a girl whose voice had been buried in silence for years. It wasn't just a picture. It was a memory someone had tried to leave behind, and a truth no one had wanted to see. The envelope arrived at the precinct marked urgent, though Shaw had been checking the lab's database every 2 hours since the samples were sent. The DNA swabs taken from hair strands found in the underground cot's pillowcase and from the plastic butterfly barrette it had gone straight to state forensic. No one said it out loud, but everyone hovered, waiting, unwilling to breathe too deeply until confirmation came. Shaw opened it in her office with the door shut, blinds drawn, hands steady only because she willed them to be. Sample A matched to Emma Porter. 99.9% certainty. She exhaled so sharply it turned into a sound. Relief, maybe, or dread, because certainty came with its own weight. Emma had been there. Not 13 years ago, not 10, recently. The dust layering the room above had been deceptive, only the corners had gathered time. The bed was still warm when tested. There had been fresh food in the cabinet, canned beans with expiration dates 2 years out. A comb with blonde hair stuck in its teeth. Nail clippings in the waste bin. One page of the notebook journal dated just 3 weeks prior. Emma Porter hadn't just survived. She had lived. The news shattered through Alder Creek like a second earthquake. The Porter house lit up with reporters again, as if someone had turned back the clock. Microphones reappeared on the porch. Dana refused to speak. Greg left through the garage every morning without looking up. People asked questions with hope sharpened into weapons. If she was alive, where is she now? Why didn't she come home? They didn't know how to say the rest of it. Why didn't she come to us? But Shaw knew what they didn't. Emma had left clue small ones. A trail woven through drawings, diary fragments, a makeshift map found taped to the underside of a crate shelf in the tunnel. It was crude, but legible. Arrows, cross streets. A bus station marked with a heart. The last note in the notebook read, "I'm going. I have to be someone else now." Shaw sat with the weight of that sentence longer than she wanted to. Emma hadn't run from home. She'd run from the grave she'd been buried in above ground, inside a lie. And if she was still running, then someone had to follow. Not to arrest, not to question, but to find the girl who never stopped trying to be found. They found the tapes in a wooden chest beneath the stairs, stacked neatly like books in a forgotten library. 27 in all, each marked with a strip of masking tape and a year. The earliest read 2012, the most recent 2021. The handwriting was tight, and deliberatino flourish, no emotion. Just dates, like gravestones. The VCR was already set up in the underground room, half buried in dust beside an old TV with rabbit ears. The techs held their breath as they inserted the first tape, its black plastic housing worn at the edges from use. The screen flickered, snow buzzed, and then it began. There they were. Emma and Lily. 7 years old, wearing party dresses, the party dresses. The camera wobbled slightly as it focused on them. Emma looked directly into the lens, uncertain, blinking. Lily stood behind her, clutching the hem of her sister's sleeve like it was an anchor. A man's voice, off-screen, said, "Smile." Neither did. Tape after tape played, and with each one, the girls aged and the room changed. The second year, they had books, a chalkboard, a globe with peeling labels. Emma wrote her name in large letters, while Lily watched. "Good," the man's voice said. "Now do it again." In the fifth tape, Lily was thinner, quieter. Emma spoke more often, her voice louder, more practiced. "She's tired," she said when Lily didn't answer a question fast enough. "She's sick." The man didn't respond. The camera lingered too long on Lily's face, vacant and slack, before cutting out. By the eighth tape, there was only one girl. Emma. 12 years old. Hair longer, face sharper. Her voice had changed. She sat on the same cot, reading aloud from a textbook about photosynthesis, while the camera zoomed slowly in and out. There was no interaction, no commentary, just her voice and the constant whir of the tape rolling forward. One tape marked with an asterisk instead of a date was different. The angle was wrong, off-center. It captured the corner of the room, the bottom half of Emma's legs, pacing. A whisper, "They won't look anymore. They forgot us. I won't." Shaw turned off the tape. It wasn't just surveillance, it was a manifesto each frame, a record of captivity, of endurance, of a childhood turned into performance. Somewhere in those grainy images, time had been lost. Lives had been edited. But Emma had documented every year. And now, the world was watching. The dirt tunnel stretched beyond the back wall of the shed like an artery. Hidden beneath a sheet of plywood and a layer of old garden tools no one had moved in years. It hadn't been part of the initial schematic. Not on the property survey, not on any blueprints. Shaw found it only when one of the forensic techs noticed a draft cold air slipping through the floor like breath from a wound. The panel lifted easily, revealing a narrow tunnel reinforced with timber beams, the wood aged and pale with mildew. No one had been down this path in weeks, maybe months, but it was clear someone had used it. The walls bore scratches, finger smudges. A string of old battery-operated lights hung like stars fallen from the ceiling, some still working, flickering dimly like the last gasps of a long-forgotten constellation. They followed it slowly, flashlights cutting long shadows through the damp air. The path curved, then dipped slightly, winding in a direction that no one had anticipated away from the house, away from the street, toward the woods. It took them 15 minutes to reach the exit. It opened beneath a thicket of overgrown ferns, hidden beneath a false rock made of fiberglass and moss. The latch was clever, spring-loaded, and camouflaged with pine needles. If you didn't know what to look for, you wouldn't have seen it. The hatch clicked open with a dull thump, and the forest stretched out before Themtall, cold and utterly silent. They were nearly half a mile from the Grimley property. The clearing nearby was small, pressed in on all sides by trees. A fire pit sat at the center, long dead, its ashes scattered by wind. On one side, they found a trail of flattened grass, leading toward the old hiking trail that had been closed off years ago after a mudslide made it unstable. And there, in the dirt just beyond the tree line, were two distinct shoe prints. One small, one smaller. Ramirez crouched, brushing her fingers gently over the impressions. "They came here," she said quietly. "They stood here." "But only one left," Shaw replied, scanning the trail ahead. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no drag marks. Just a single set of prints continuing on, faint but purposeful, heading toward the path that led to town. Whoever used that tunnel hadn't been running blindly. They had a destination in mind. And, maybe for the first time, a chance to get there. It was the dog that found it. A cadaver dog, part of the second wave of search crews sweeping the area beyond the hidden tunnel exit, paused suddenly near a patch of mossy undergrowth. The handler felt the familiar tension in the leash shift in breath. A low growl in the back of the throat hand called it in. The team converged, moving quietly, instinctively. No sirens, no shouting. Just boots in the earth and gloved hands parting ferns with the reverence of a burial. They found the shoe first. Half buried beneath a blanket of pine needles and soft rot, it was a child's sneaker, pale pink, the Velcro strap torn and fraying at the edges. Time had weathered it, but not beyond recognition. Dana had described them once, in the first report-matching pairs, light-up soles, Lily's favorite. The twins wore them the day they vanished. It had sounded like a detail meant to hurt. Now it sounded like evidence. Beneath the shoe, they found more. Strands of hair, blondes turned brittle and earth-colored by time. Nearby, the skeletal remains of a child's Beretith plastic warped, cracked, the metal clasp still intact. The soil was disturbed in a small radius, shallow but deliberate. Someone had tried to cover it, not with care, but necessity. Fast, panicked. Ramirez crouched beside the scene as the forensic team erected a small tent overhead, shielding it from wind and eyes. Shaw stood a few feet back, arms crossed tight against the cold, watching the body bag unroll on the stretcher like a cruel punctuation mark to everything they'd uncovered. The samples were rushed to the lab. By nightfall, the call came. "It's her." Lily Porter. Confirmed by dental records and mitochondrial DNA, pulled from the Barrett. 7 years old, at the time of disappearance. Cause of death undetermined, but bones showed no signs of trauma. The earth had swallowed the rest. Shaw stared at the report long after the line went dead. Her hand traced the edge of the file like she could dull it into something less sharp. The girl with the gap-toothed smile in every missing flyer. The one always standing just behind her sister. Gone, long before anyone knew she was missing for real. She called the Porters herself. Dana didn't speak. Greg asked only one question. Was she alone? Shaw didn't answer. There was no right way to say yes. The report had been buried, filed under the kind of vague, low-priority incident that slips through the cracks when systems are overwhelmed and leads don't scream for attention. It came from a town in Indian Asmal, rural, forgettable. A gas station clerk had called it in late one night after a girl came in alone, bought 2 granola bars and a bottle of water, then vanished before he could ask her name. She'd paid in wrinkled bills, exact change, and left behind a single item, a red glove, child-sized. The report was short, 4 paragraphs. The clerk guessed her age around 15, maybe 16. Blonde hair, blue eyes, thin. Said she had a strange way of speaking, careful, measured, like every word had been practiced in her head first. She wouldn't look him in the eye. When he asked if she needed help, she flinched like the question itself had teeth. It had been dismissed as a runaway. No ID, no security footage cameras were down, no other witnesses, no follow-up. But now, 6 months later, that red glove meant something. Detective Shaw sat in the back office of the station with the report spread out before her, a photocopy of the clerk's original handwriting curled at the corners. She circled 2 lines. She looked like she hadn't been outside in a while. Pale. Too pale. And she said her name was M. Just M. Shaw pulled up the map and plotted the sighting. Then she drew a line back to Alder Creek, tracking the distance between the Indiana town and the hidden tunnel in Grimley's shed. 370 miles. It was possible, with time, with fear, with purpose. She checked the missing persons database again. There were no other Emmas of that age reported missing in the area. No other girls matching the composite sketch created from childhood photos of Emma Porter, age progressed by forensic artists just weeks earlier. Shaw stared at the sketch, then at the clerk's note. Too pale. The girl had been underground for years. Of course, she was pale. Ramirez knocked on the door, a folder in hand. "You need to see this," she said. Inside was a new report, another sighting. A girl matching Emma's description seen boarding a Greyhound bus in Ohio, no ID, paid cash, destination unknown. Shaw didn't speak. She just reached for her keys. Emma wasn't lost anymore. She was moving. The footage was grainy, black and white, with timestamps that blinked across the bottom of the screen like a pulse. The manager of the roadside motel in southern Ohio had saved it out of instinct, not expectation. She hadn't even called the police. Just tucked the clip into a USB and slid it into a drawer, unsure if it meant anything at all. It had happened late too, 13 a.m., on a rainy Tuesday. No one had reason to remember. But the girl? The girl had stayed with her. In the footage, the girl moved fast. Thin, hooded, head down. She entered the motel lobby through the side door, barefoot despite the weather. The clerk had stepped out to smoke. The camera caught her rifling through the mini-fridge behind the check-in counter, pulling out a yogurt, a sandwich wrapped in foil, and 2 bottles of water. She hesitated before taking one of the granola bars, then stuffed it into her pocket like it weighed more than it should. There was a moment, just a second, where she looked up toward the camera. The hood slipped back slightly. Blonde hair, tangled. Face gaunt, eyes wide. She wasn't afraid, not quite. But there was something hollow in her expression, like she was floating just above her own skin, not running, not hiding, surviving. The motel manager, a woman named Darla, found something else after the girl left. A sticky note, curled slightly at the edge, left on the counter next to the empty register drawer. It read, simply, "I'm sorry, Emma." No last name, no explanation. Just a name written in looping, uncertain script. The clerk hadn't thought much of it at the time. Shoplifters don't usually leave apologies. She assumed the girl was high, maybe homeless, the kind you didn't make eye contact with on the street. But when the detective from Alder Creek called asking about a blonde girl seen near the bus depot, Darla remembered. She found the note, the USB, and suddenly it was more than a petty theft. Shaw watched the footage on a loop, frame by frame, the hesitation before the granola bar, the glance at the camera, the note left behind like a breadcrumb in a dark forest. "She wanted to be found," Shaw said, barely above a whisper. "Just not yet." And somewhere, out there in the rain, Emma was still moving, slipping between towns, stealing meals, leaving behind her name like a ghost, aching to be remembered. The knock came just after sunrise, when the sky was still the pale, uncertain gray of morning not yet decided. The The small rental home sat at the edge of a quiet street in Franklin, Pennsylvania, just another forgotten corner in a map of nowhere. The front yard was overgrown, the mailbox crooked. A single light glowed from a back room. Emma answered the door on the second knock. She was older now, of course, 17, maybe 18. Her hair was darker, cut bluntly to her shoulders, and her frame was slight, like someone who had learned to take up less space on purpose. She wore a hoodie 2 sizes too big and held it closed at the neck with one hand. The other hand stayed behind the door, hidden. Detective Shaw introduced herself softly. No badge raised, no step forward. Just her voice, calm and steady. "Emma," she said. "It's okay. We're not here to take you. We're here to bring you home." Emma didn't respond at first. Her eyes flicked between Shaw and the officer beside her, then to the unmarked car, idling at the curb, then back to Shaw. Her lips parted, then pressed closed again like she was testing the weight of words before releasing them. "My name's Emily King," she said quietly. "You've got the wrong person." "You wrote your name in a motel in Ohio," Shaw replied. "You left it behind, just like the note in the tunnel, just like the drawing behind the door." Emma flinched at that. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse into their arms. She simply opened the door a little wider and let them in. Inside, the house was clean but sparse furniture that didn't belong to her. A stack of books by the mattress on the floor, a few cans of soup in the kitchen. No pictures, no clutter. Like she was living in parentheses. She sat on the couch and picked at her sleeve as Shaw gently laid out the evidence, the DNA, the drawings, the video footage, the footprints. At the mention of Lily, Emma's eyes dropped. "She didn't make it," she said, her voice a thread. "I couldn't get her out. He said she was sick. I should have." She stopped, started again. "I waited too long." Shaw reached across the space between them and placed the locket from the tunnel on the table. Gold. Etched with E+L. Emma's hand trembled as she picked it up. "My name," she whispered, "is Emma Porter." And for the first time in 13 years, she said it without fear. She spoke in pieces at first. The words came slow, like pried-open secrets each one, costing her something to say. They sat in a quiet room at the station, blinds drawn, a cup of untouched tea cooling on the table beside her. Emma didn't look at anyone directly. She looked just past them, like she was still underground, still speaking through walls. "He told us it was safer down there," she began. "That something bad had happened above. Something we wouldn't understand. We were too young. He said our parents had forgotten us. That they gave us to him so we could learn how to survive." Shaw listened without moving. She had heard hundreds of interviews, victims, survivors, but Emma's voice, flat, without inflection, made the room feel colder than it was. "The first year, Lily cried all the time. She didn't sleep unless I did. I'd stay awake just to keep her calm. He'd get mad when we cried, said it was ungrateful, that he'd given us a home." Emma's hand twitched slightly, then stilled. "He taught us things. Math, science, how to make soap, how to sew. But if we got it wrong, he'd lock the door. Sometimes for a few hours. Once, for 3 days. No light. No food. Just silence. And when it opened again, we had to say thank you." She paused. The ticking of the wall clock became unbearably loud. "Lily got sick when we were 9. A fever. She couldn't eat. I begged him to take her outside. He said the world was worse, that if she left, she'd die faster. He gave her cough syrup. Vitamins. But she didn't get better." Emma swallowed, jaw clenched. "One morning I woke up and she wasn't breathing. I tried. I shook her. I screamed. He came in, told me she was at peace now, that she'd been too soft for this world. I didn't speak for a month after that." Shaw didn't speak either. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be a lie. "I started planning after that," Emma continued. "I pretended to believe him, pretended I was grateful. He started trusting me more, letting me upstairs when he was home. Sometimes he'd leave the tunnel unlocked." She touched the locket at her neck. The day I left, I wrote her name on the wall, so someone would know she was real. Then, after a breath, I didn't just run. I left the door open behind me. They waited for her. Lined up along the sidewalks, holding handmade signs and cell phones and too many questions, Alder Creek had gathered like a congregation on a chilly morning in April. The banner across the welcome sign read, "Emma, we missed you." Someone had tied yellow ribbons around the old oak trees on Main Street, and the church bell rang exactly 13 times at noon. A gesture, someone said. Symbolic, but to Emma it just sounded like a countdown she'd already survived. She stepped out of the unmarked car slowly, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her jacket, hood pulled low. She didn't make eye contact. The town clapped anyway. There were children on their parents' shoulders, reporters behind the cordon, teachers who had aged into strangers. The mayor tried to give her flowers, white lilies, but Emma only stared at them until someone gently took them from his hands. Shaw stood close behind her, a silent shadow, ready to step in if needed. But Emma didn't flinch. She simply walked forward, through the noise, toward the one house that hadn't changed. Home. Her mother was on the porch, frozen in place, a hand pressed against her mouth like she was trying to hold back all the years. Greg stood beside her, and for a moment, Emma saw the man from the photographs again, the one who used to carry her on his shoulders, not the one who'd been in headlines. The silence between them cracked as Dana rushed forward and folded Emma into her arms. Emma didn't cry. She stood there, stiff, letting it happen, her eyes wide open over her mother's shoulder. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. Later, inside the house, it felt like walking through a museum of herself. Photos still hung in the hallway. The twins' room had been left untouched, posters on the wall, a stuffed animal on the bed. Emma stood in the doorway, her breath shallow. The room smelled like time and memory and lavender spray. "I don't know how to be here," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Dana reached for her hand. "You don't have to be anything right now." But Alder Creek wanted something. Closure. Redemption. A happy ending. Emma wasn't sure she could give them that. She wasn't a miracle. She was a girl who had walked out of a nightmare, and somehow kept walking. The town that forgot her now wanted to hold her up. She wasn't ready to be their story. She was still learning how to be her own. The service was held in the town square, beneath a sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to rain. The memorial had been Greg's idea way to say goodbye, finally, to the daughter they never got to bury. The police had returned what little they could, bone fragments, the melted barrette, the shoe. It wasn't enough, but it was something. A box with weight, a name carved into stone. Proof that Lily had existed outside of memory. White chairs lined the grass, facing a small wooden stage. A photo of Lily stood on an easel hair last school portrait. Hair in pigtails, mouth caught in the half-smile she gave when someone told her to be serious. There were flowers, music. The kind of quiet you only hear when no one dares speak first. Emma sat in the front row, shoulders rigid, jaw set. She wore a dark dress that didn't belong to her, borrowed from a neighbor. Her fingers toyed with the edge of the locket at her neck, tracing the initials like they were still a map she hadn't finished reading. When they asked if she wanted to speak, she hadn't said yes. She hadn't said no, either. And now, she stood. She climbed the steps slowly, one hand on the railing, as if she were afraid the stage might disappear beneath her. The microphone waited, humming softly. She didn't clear her throat. Didn't look up. "My sister was the kind of person who wanted to take care of everyone," she said, voice quiet but firm. "Even when she was scared, she'd try to make me laugh. She used to tell me stories about a world above where everything was soft and warm and safe. I didn't believe her. Not for a long time." Emma looked out over the crowd then, her eyes finding no one and everyone all at once. She didn't get to grow up. She didn't get a chance to make mistakes, to figure out who she was without me. Her voice wavered. She paused. "I kept her alive in my head for as long as I could. Every time I was afraid, I pretended she was still behind me, holding my sleeve, but the truth is, she saved me before I ever left." She stepped back from the mic, heart pounding in her throat. The applause didn't come yet, just silence. And then the soft sound of someone crying. Lily's name floated in the air between them like a prayer. And this time, Emma said goodbye out loud. The house on Willow Street was small, tucked between two larger ones that had probably once looked just as modest before time added porches and additions and color. Emma chose it not because it was perfect, it wasn't, but because it was quiet. It didn't creak at night. It didn't smell like old fear. And the windows faced east, so the mornings arrived early and golden and full of things she hadn't learned how to name yet. She'd been there 3 weeks. Long enough to hang her own curtains, long enough to buy a plant and accidentally overwater it. Long enough to stop checking the locks 3 times before bed. Now, she only checked once. She still didn't sleep much. Sometimes she woke up tangled in sheets, heart pounding, waiting for a door to open that no longer existed. But the difference now was that she got up anyway. She volunteered twice a week at the library downtown, shelving books and repairing bindings with tape and careful hands. Children came in after school, loud and messy and alive. She watched them from a distance, sometimes smiling, sometimes not. One girl, maybe 10 years old, liked to sit near her and read aloud, always pausing to ask if she was saying the words right. Emma never corrected her. Therapy was part of the routine. So were long walks. And music. She kept a journal, now blue cover, soft pages, no locks. She wrote to Lily sometimes. Not letters, exactly. Just fragments. The things she couldn't say out loud yet. I wore your favorite color today. Someone laughed at my joke. I made dinner and didn't burn it. I didn't flinch when the thunder started. I kept the lights off, just to see if I could. There were still bad days. Mornings when her hands trembled too much to hold a toothbrush. Nights when the past knocked louder than sleep. But they didn't own her anymore. The story didn't end in the tunnel. It didn't end in a courtroom. It didn't even end with Lily's name on a stone. It was still being written. That afternoon, she stood in front of her front door with a key in hand. The sun cast long shadows across the walkway. She looked at the brass knob, simple and unthreatening, and for the first time her fingers didn't shake. She slid the key into the lock, turned it, opened the door, and walked inside.